welcome to another D&D Stories. It is so good to be back. Welcome to Season 3. Ah, God, it's been a while, hasn't it? I exploded. But here I am, back from the dead, back with more stories, more games, and more stuff to share with you guys. I am truly out of D&D stories at this point. We've got RPGs, we've got board games, we've got card games, and all kinds of stuff to go with it. So this show is nowhere near over. So let's delve right into a story that I have been meaning to tell for a long time. And the only reason I haven't told it yet is because it's so long. And it's kind of become tradition here on D&D Stories that I tell super long stories like at the beginning of seasons. So like you had Kobold Mountains early on, and then we had Enter the Labyrinth. So this one is called The Legend of the Hawktotem Tribe. And it comes from World of Warcraft. And yes, I played World of Warcraft for, gosh, 5 years, I think. A very long time. Just solid for a long time, then on and off, and then I finally stopped. A little bit into Mist of Pandaria, because I kind of drew the line at Kung Fu Pandas. But, you know, whatever. And Blizzard came up with that before the Kung Fu Panda movie. That's been teased for decades, so don't get on them for that. This story takes place during, for you lore buffs, this takes place during the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, and then it ends a little bit into Cataclysm. So, well into World of Warcraft's lifespan, but like not anywhere near like current day. So this was before looking for raid. This was before, you know, all these things that made the game way too easy. But it wasn't quite back at the very beginning when everything was, you know, super hard and, you know, you actually had to quest and earn things. So it was a little somewhere in the middle when things were gated. That's the word I wanted. Back when you had to do raids that were, you couldn't do the whole raid because you'd do like 4 bosses and then you had to wait a couple of weeks for them to release like the next part of the raid. It was around that era. Now I hailed from the Moonguard RP server, which means that for those that don't play WoW or haven't played WoW, that on RP servers, there's not a whole ton of raiding that goes on, you know, big bosses and things. There's not a whole ton of, like, player versus player out in the world going on, but there is a ton of, like, roleplay and, like, hanging out in cities or scheduling, like, events for characters to go to in which you kind of embrace the lore and pretend to be your character. So if you're not off questing or going for that latest daily quest or gathering tokens or badges or whatever you have to grind out over and over and over to get something shiny, you would get together with your friends and, you know, tell campfire stories or go on hikes or hunt for a particular beast or, you know, hang out in a tavern, you know, just pretend to be drunk and tip the bar wench that's behind the that's behind the bar, role-playing a bar wench. You know, there's you know, very rich community. Moonguard was a very old server, and I was a Tauren warrior, so I was always Horde side. Sorry, Alliance, I just couldn't. Stormwind never really appealed to me. I was a Tauren warrior, Horde side, that I kind of have to set this up because it's hard to explain the impact of the story without laying a lot of groundwork. And I don't mean just for the people that have never played WoW, but to set up this character in general. The name that I eventually picked out was Mundle. And the reason that I picked that was because at the time I was taking a phonetics class in college, which is basically learning how people speak and why they speak that way. You know, somebody in Boston versus New York versus Florida versus Kentucky, etc., etc. You know, how they speak, why they speak differently, and it's basically a sociology class. And I was learning about high sounds, low sounds, glottal sounds, etc., etc., and I picked 2 syllables, mun and dull, because they take place down here. They're called, not glottal sounds. They might be glottal sounds. I don't know. I've long since forgotten the terminology, but they're both syllables that take place in the back bottom of your mouth when you make them. Mundle. And Tauren, when you speak to them in the game, have, you know, very low, very rich, deep voices. Even their women have lower end female voices. And because Tauren speak that way, whenever you would refer to Mundle, you would have to use the lower end of your mouth and throat to speak his name, so it sounded like a Tauren name. Later, I found out that Mundle, at least according to the Urban Dictionary, however much stock you put in the Urban Dictionary, Mundle is actually a word that means someone who is racist against black people. And I thought, oh God. And I didn't find this out until long after I quit WoW. But I was like, oh God. And, you know, none of the other people I hung out with knew this. None of my friends knew this. Nobody who I played WoW with knew this. So it might just be something I ran across that nobody actually knows about. It might be just something the Urban Dictionary made up, but I found that and I was like, oh God, that's terrible. But, you know, that'll be the only time I mention that, but until later when it turns funny. But Mundle was a Tauren warrior, and at the time, I think the level cap was like 80. You know, there's so many expansions to WoW now, I've forgotten, you know, what expansion was what level cap. Like, I think Burning Crusade was 70, so yeah, Wrath of the Lich King would have been 80. I decided, you know, through my other characters that, you know, Wrath of the Lich King really didn't appeal to me very much. You know, it was all cold, it was all ice and spiders, and 90% of the enemies you were fighting in Northrend were undead, and it was part of the lore. You know, we were going to fight and kill the Lich King, who was an undead prince from way back in WoW's lore, like 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, whatever. That we were going to take the fight to Arthas, and that was like the part of the lore that was going on right now. But I got so tired, you know, after you've killed 3,000 zombies and all these undead spiders, and there's just, it's all snow and ice and gnarled trees, you get sick of it fast. There's just, you know, Northrend as a continent was a grim, grim place that you just did not want to be there. If you were a role player, you were there as like a soldier, and you couldn't wait to go home. You know, it was just this nasty, unforgiving, frostbitten place that just, my God, why would you ever go there? But because I didn't like Wrath of the Lich King very much, and I wasn't very fond of God, the Outlands, I've forgotten the name of that expansion already, the first WoW expansion. That's gonna bother me now. Anyway, I wasn't fond of the first 2 expansions very much, as I was with the core game, like the first 60 levels. Vanilla. They call it Vanilla WoW, because that was the way the game was when it first started out, when you had to, you know, earn everything, go to dungeons instead of teleporting there. You know, there were people in the cities, they weren't just like ghost towns. There was stuff going on, you had to travel and, you know, talk to people and learn things, and, you know, there were enemies out there that would just own your face, and you would have no way of killing them unless you brought, like, you know, a group of people with you. There were world bosses. You would have to bring like 40 people to take on some of these creatures that were just out roaming in the world. And vanilla WoW to me was, and I've read articles and things, WoW was a very, very unstable, very unforgiving game back in the day that would just destroy you if you didn't have, like, you had to earn things a lot more. And that, you know, the concept of, you know, WoW, the WoW of today basically gives you things, and if you run the same dungeon enough times, you'll get tokens, and you can trade in those tokens or valor points or whatever it is now to get the shiniest gear, and then at the end of the day everybody looks the same. Well, back in, you know, the day with vanilla WoW, the rose-tinted glasses say that, you know, if you wanted something, you had to go out there and earn it. You know, if you wanted an epic, like, item, you know, it has, like, purple text on it, so you can tell it's epic and rare. Epics were epic back then. Now you can just go run a dungeon 20 times and just get any epic you want to. Back then, epics were epic, because you had to go through storylines, you had to kill raid bosses, you had to do all these different things. There weren't, you know, it was very happenstance and devotion and you know, the journey, not the destination kind of things. And that really appealed to me as a WoW player. So what I decided to do was level lock Mundle, or what was it called, experience stop or level lock or whatever it was, when he reached level 60, which was the level cap for vanilla WoW before the expansions came out, to level lock him there so that he could not gain any more experience. He could not become any more powerful or, you know, level up to 60, 70, 80 any higher than he was right then. So I reached level 60, stopped his experience points, and I said, you know what? I know it's easier now than it was back then by a long shot, but I want to go and experience vanilla WoW, like, in its entirety. And, you know, just look at all the little secrets and doodads and things that are hidden through the world that people just don't look at anymore. You know, like, when they go through Burning Crusade, that's what it was. Burning Crusade, the first expansion, sent people into another dimension, and the world emptied out because everybody was playing in Outlands. And, you know, when Wrath of the Lich King started, everybody ran to Northrend, and there's nobody left in the regular world unless they were using the auction house, or just running through quests as quickly as they could to run up through the levels and, you know, get back to raiding or whatever they needed to, you know, whatever they wanted to do. And I decided, no, I really don't have the scheduling stability for raiding, and I suck at PvP, so I was like, you know what, I'm going to, like, not, like, do every quest or anything in the old world, but try to see what I can do, what can I earn, what can I do to make myself unique, because in a role-playing server, especially in an MMO, like World of Warcraft, when everybody is supposed to be a hero, nobody is. I think it was like Syndrome from The Incredibles, who said, you know, when I'm old, I'll sell my inventions, and then everybody can be super, and when everybody is super, nobody will be. It's kind of like that. So if you want to become famous or infamous or well-known or respected in a roleplay server in World of Warcraft, you had to, like, chisel out something unique about yourself, something tangible that people can kind of gravitate towards. And I thought for a long time, I said, well, I'm locked at level 60, so I can't, like, be the top-end raider. I can't be the top-end PvP, or, you know, nobody's going to want a level 60 guildmaster or anything like that. I'm not going to be anybody, like, gameplay-wise, I'm not going to be anybody important. But what can I do otherwise that would kind of carve out a reputation for me? Because, you know, that's what you do in a roleplay server. You want to be known. You know, are you an epic adventurer? Are you a famous are you a famous enchanter? Are you, you know, the fastest draw with a musket in the land? Are you, you know, the mysterious druid who's only on at the midnight hour on Thursdays, and if you talk to that person, they speak in riddles? You know, there was all kinds of stuff on Moonguard that was going on, and a rare handful of people would like rise above the others, and I kind of wanted that for myself. I'm kind of narcissistic. I mean, I you know, you guys watch me, and that makes me feel good because I like the attention. That's one of my character flaws. You know, if you had me in OVA, I would have narcissist, you know. But I said, okay, what can I do to carve out like a reputation for myself? Being level 60. And I said, well, level 60 content is not like especially impressive anymore. So, you know, a level 90 can run through and just crush everything. You know, or a level, what was it, level 80 at the time. Can just run through and crush everything. So, what can I do different? And I thought, well, this is a roleplay server, so I could be like a blacksmith and find like all the recipes that are hidden around the old world that people just don't have anymore. Like, there were places like when WoW started, there were blacksmithing recipes that you had to like go into a dungeon, go off the beaten path, hop down some rocks, and you would find like a skeleton laying in the corner with a scroll clenched in his hand, and if you took the scroll, he would like hop up and like fight you, but then he would drop the scroll, and it would be like a blacksmithing recipe. There would be like fire resist gear plus strength plus something else, and it would be unique for you to make, and then nobody else had it, so you could make it for them and then charge them a pretty penny. Or, in my case, in a role-playing server where people like to look nice, you know, being in costume is part of the roleplay. If they decide they like what that armor looks like, then they'll pay you a pretty penny because, well, nobody else has that recipe where you have to go down into the dungeon, fight the skeleton, jump over lava rocks and all that other garbage, because they don't want to spend, you know, an hour jumping down there and doing all that stuff just to look nice. But at the same time, you know, I was locked at level 60, so it was an appropriate dungeon with appropriate treasure and finding something that nobody else had that they might want, or, you know, a scroll, a blacksmithing recipe that nobody else had anymore because, you know, vanilla WoW was, what, 5 years old at the time. Nobody runs after those recipes anymore because the stats are, they're nothing. You know, if you're level 80, you're not going to pay a pretty penny for like level 55, level 60 exotic gear from the bottom of a dungeon, you know, if you want, unless you want to like look nice, which on a role-playing server was a great way to make money. So what Mundle did, at least at first, was he went from place to place to the far ends of Azeroth on these exotic islands, down in volcanoes, going through dungeons, talking to people, getting reputation with factions that nobody talks to anymore, getting these blacksmith recipes, and then what I would do was advertise them, like on the trade channel or on the forums, you know, hey, if you want to look like this, you know, and nobody looks like that anymore because nobody knows how to make that gear except for me, you know, you can pay X amount of gold, you know, bring your own materials, etc., etc., and you can look, you know, this cool. And role players love that. They think it's great. You know, I learned how to make so many just weird sets of armor, and, you know, I spent like 3 days on an island once, just like ran my whole damn weekend down. That's how bad it was with me playing WoW for a while. Ran my whole damn weekend down, sitting on this tiny island, killing like snake monsters, or naga, or whatever they're called, because they had a low chance of dropping these exotic blacksmithing recipes that would be like arcane resistance and nature damage resistance, and that doesn't even make sense anymore in WoW's terms. You would never wear armor like that, but it looked cool. So once I gathered, you know, the 6 or 8 pieces of that, and it took so damn long, I would advertise it as an armor set. I said, okay, bring me these materials and pay me, you know, this big lump of gold, you know, for my time, and I'm the only guy that can make this. And you can look this cool, and nobody else can look like that, because nobody has those blacksmithing recipes. I'm talking in circles, sorry. This was like the motif for my character, was that Mundle was an old world blacksmith. And unless you had like a character from way back in the day who was completely devoted to blacksmithing, Mundle was the only guy that had all these recipes. So if you wanted to look a certain way, or if you wanted to look exotic in terms of chainmail or plate mail, you could go to Mundle, ask to see his wares, and look completely unique compared to other people. Like, you know, if you go up to end game armor, you know, everybody kind of looks the same, I'll be honest. Especially in Wrath of the Lich King. Everything was brown and rust, and it looked like garbage. It was really unappealing. And this was before transmog came around. Transmogrification was when you take the stats of one thing and the look of another thing, so you can look however you want and still have legitimate stats. That didn't come until way down the line in Mists of Pandaria, which was, God, what, 8 years in? It took them 8 years to start doing that. God, Guild Wars started with that. I mean, did it not occur to them to do... Anyway. So that was how Mundle made his living, and he lived in like the level 1 through level 60 vanilla WoW, just hunting these old recipes. And he came to the point where he kind of knew everything, and he could, I mean, I got it down to like 2 or 3 things that like only raid bosses would drop these recipes, and, you know, it was a huge hassle to gather, you know, 5, 6, 10 people that would do an old world raid. And, you know, and even then there's only the small chance that that boss would drop that. And it was just, you know, there were like 4 things that I missed out of the entire, you know, old world game. And then I came across the, what were they? The thorium brotherhood, I think. There was this kind of metal in vanilla WoW called, was it dark steel? I think it was dark steel. I hope it was dark steel, because I'm supposed to be the expert of what I'm talking about. There was a special kind of metal, dark iron. That's what it was. God, I can't believe I forgot that. Dark iron. There was a special kind of metal in Old World WoW called dark iron that you would only get from really, really dangerous places, like old raid dungeons and high-level, really dangerous places where there were like dragons and golems and really like tear-your-face-off enemies would show up. And like I said, one raid dungeon had them in there. And what it was this special kind of metal that you couldn't smelt. You could gather up all the ore you wanted, and it would just sit in your bags. You could go to, you know, the smithy in any town or any settlement, and you would try to smelt it like into bars so you could use it to make armor or whatever, and you couldn't do it. You had to take dark iron basically into the equivalent of Mount Doom. I forget what it's called now, but like into the freaking lava of Mount Doom. It was this place. See, I forget all the names because it's been so long, and it makes my story sound like shit. Anyway, you had to go to this specific dungeon that was like 2 hours long, back when the game was hardcore and dungeons were really freaking long and were labyrinthing in every direction instead of being like a straight hallway. And you had to go down into this monster of a dungeon that took forever to get there. to this place called the Dark Iron Forge. And you would put in, instead of like 2, you know, bars, every other metal in the game at the time took 2 pieces of ore to make a bar. Dark iron took like 8 pieces, so it would just eat all your pieces of freaking dark iron and make a few bars. But Mundle would gather up as much as he possibly could, because that's what he did, and then go down to the Dark Iron Forge and smelt it all, and then he would have to go to another point in that same dungeon called the Dark Iron Anvil. And guess what? You can only make things with dark iron at the Dark Iron Anvil, which was, again, an hour and a half down in the other direction of this wicked long dungeon. So I basically had to like grab a level 90 and say, hey, would you run me to the Dark Iron Anvil or to the Dark Iron Forge so I can make a few things and then go sell them. Because if you ran with a regular group, it would take all night. And again, this is back when before things got super easy and WoW changed things around and made it more streamlined. This was back when you actually had to work to get things. And we would run down there, and Mundle would smelt all his stuff and make dark iron swords or dark iron plate mail, which was like red and black and looked badass. And you know, people on role-playing servers want to look badass. And when it's so much effort to make dark iron armor, you would make a shit ton of money just immediately. And people don't like to buy, you know, partial armor sets, because if things don't mix and match well, you don't look very good. So they would buy entire armor sets, entire, you know, 2 great swords instead of 1, and just different things like that. Made tons and tons of money for a level 60. He made so much money doing that. And I said, and I kind of got to the point with this faction called the Thorium Brotherhood, to where, you know, I had there was like this rivalry, this blood rivalry between the Thorium Brotherhood, which were dwarves, and the Dark Iron Dwarves, which were basically evil dwarves that were like stained with soot, and they had red eyes, and they were really easy to spot. And if you killed enough Dark Iron Dwarves, and you ran enough errands, and you gathered enough like basilisk scales and crystals, and you did all their quests, and you know, you did all this shit for the Thorium Brotherhood, you could go down into this dungeon. Same one. It's that big. There's so much stuff going on in this freaking dungeon. You could go down into the same dungeon, and there's a bar down there for Dark Iron Dwarves and a few other important NPCs. If you go off to one side, you can talk to somebody, and if you are exalted with the Thorium Brotherhood, which is like, you know, which says you've done all their quests and run all their errands and done all their other, you know, taken out their trash and all that other garbage. If you became exalted in your reputation with the Thorium Brotherhood, they would give you a special blacksmithing recipe. And here's where things got interesting, because they gave you like, I think 12, 15. They're the ones that give you all the dark iron recipes. There was another recipe that they would only give to people who really ground it out. And it was a lot of grinding. It was a lot of basilisks to kill. It was a lot of quests, repeatable events, you know, dwarves to kill. It took forever because it was just me, level 60. Not level 90, level 60, like the way it was supposed to be done. And, which was the point of this character. And he goes, you know, you are now exalted with the Thorium Brotherhood, and we have this special gift for you. And this dwarf kind of like summons up the powers of the nether and conjures like this portal in front of him on the floor, just this tiny little portal, and this scroll kind of like rises up out of the floor, and I recognize it. It's a blacksmithing recipe. And I reach out and I take it, and it's this thing called the Sulfuron hammer. And I'm like, what is this? And I look, and obviously I open the scroll and I read it, and, Mundle, learns it, so he knows what it takes to make a Sulfuron hammer. And I look at the ingredients, and they're impossible. It wanted, and I forget exactly, I'll stick it like here, if I can find a graphic that tells you exactly what it takes, and, it won't make any sense to you, but just to show you the list in general, is that the materials it wanted were impossible to get on your own. You had to go to raids. You had to, get X number of dark iron bars. You had to fell bosses to get some of these items. And I think they were like, not Heart of Fire, but I forget what the items were called. The blue ones that you see here would only drop from bosses in like a raid, and you would need to bring like groups of people, and then basically tell them, hey, I need this for blacksmithing, and you would have to pray they would let you have it, because if you just bring a group of people, then it's kind of a free-for-all for loot at the time. So hey, I'm blacksmithing, I need those, and you would pray they were that nice and wouldn't just like take them and put them on the auction house. And it took forever. It took, I think, 6 weeks, because you could only do a raid, once a week. It took at least a month and a half for me to do this, and I wanted it, because it was there, and that was like the culmination of being a blacksmith in Vanilla WoW, was to craft the Sulfuron hammer. And I went and looked up like the lore on it, because Sulfuron sounded familiar. And it turns out that Sulfuron was it's a two-handed hammer. It's black. In fact, I'll put up more pictures here so you can see it. But it's basically, it's hard to describe. It's the vessel. There it is. It's the vessel for one of the first and only legendary weapons in WoW. And the Sulfuron hammer is like black. It's charcoal gray, and it's covered with spikes, and it's kind of impressive on its own. But what you were supposed to do was you would go to this place called Molten Core and fight a boss called Ragnaros, the Fire Lord. And when you fight him, he's got this big hammer in his hand. He's basically a giant like fire elemental. And yeah, Ragnaros, the Fire Lord. And he had this big hammer in his hand called Sulfurous. And it looks a lot like Sulfuron, but it's not. Sulfurous, or Sulfurous, or whatever you want to call it. It sounds like sulfur to me. Sulfurous looked a lot like Sulfuron, but it was like orange, and it glowed like lava, and it was like really big, obnoxious, like hit something and it would die like 3 times over, kind of like two-handed hammer. And what you were supposed to do was craft Sulfuron, which was, my god, in and of itself, go kill Ragnaros, who was a raid boss, back in the day. I mean, now you could probably, two-man him, because people are level 90 now, but back in the day it took like 40 people. You were supposed to build Sulfuron, oh my god, and then make it to the end of the Molten Core raid and kill Ragnaros. And he had, and I quote, a 1% chance, 1% chance of dropping the Eye of Ragnaros. And what you were supposed to do was take Sulfuron and the Eye of Ragnaros and stick them together, and it would turn into Sulfurous, the Fist of Ragnarok. It was basically like a miniaturized, a mortal can carry this, the Fire Lord's hammer, Sulfurous. And that kind of became Mundle's quest for a long time. Like, whenever he hung out in taverns, he would talk about it, or he would try to recruit people to go to Molten Core, and, a bunch of people wouldn't go because it was too scary, or, they're level 90, it's not worth their time, etc. and he would spend his time cobbling together these groups of people to basically farm Ragnaros. And it took, I think, 6 tries, and my God, I was so lucky. Because, 1% chance. I crafted Sulfurous, it took me 6 weeks. I went to farm Ragnaros, it took 6 tries. So 3 months, this hammer in the making. And I went, and I gathered all my friends, because I wanted all of them to see this. This was like an event that never happens, because, people either don't do it anymore, or it's not worth it, or different things like that. And I said, look, behold, Sulfuron and the Eye of Ragnaros. Boom! And I made Sulfurous, the Fist of Ragnarok. And it's like, the text on the item is orange, and there's, I think, 9 items in all of WoW that you can hold and like show off. I think there's like 9 items in all of WoW that have orange text that you can like take and have. And there's some that have time limits, and others that are just like items you hold and things like that. But like weapons and like armor and things like that, there's like 9, and almost all of them are next to impossible to get. They were just like these crowning achievements. They were called legendary items. So in WoW it went common, uncommon, rare, epic, and then legendary. There's also artifact, but that was something else entirely. Legendary, orange text. Oh my God. And so, when Mundle was, wandering around town, from then on, would always wear Sulfurous on his back. And, people that knew of Mundle, knew he was a blacksmith, knew who he was, what he did, because he was slowly carving out this reputation as a blacksmith, chasing the Fist of Ragnarok, and then suddenly he shows up in town one day with it on his back. They basically, my friends and the people that I hung around with basically threw me a party. We went to like a beach resort somewhere in wherever that is in WoW, I forget. And they threw me like a beach party, and we threw campfires and danced and got elves in bikinis and all this other garbage, just running around celebrating this 3-month quest that took so long, and everybody that knew me knew what I was doing, and finally did it. It was such a good feeling, and I couldn't believe that Mundle had done this. And so he basically rose to be the most famous blacksmith on Moonguard for a long time. And and the high of it kind of tapered off after a while, because once you've learned everything in the old world, that's kind of your stopping point. But the Fist of Ragnarok kind of became Mundle's calling card, and he renamed his smithy, his business, Mundle's Sulfuron Smithy, so that people would know, he's the guy with the hammer. He's the one who can forge the Fist of Ragnarok. And there were other people, there were a lot of other people that would like approach Mundle and say, hey, I want to build Sulfuron. And I think, and Mundle charged him a pretty penny back then too, because nobody else could make Sulfuron. And I would say, hey, it's your materials plus like 700 gold. And they would pay for it too, because they, it's a legendary item. Even though it's a level 60 legendary item, it's still a legendary item. And they would say, they would need a blacksmith to make, the vessel, the gray hammer that could turn into the lava hammer, Sulfurous. They would pay him 700 gold a pop for Sulfuron, after they had spent all this time gathering materials, doing these quests, running this dungeon, doing things like that. And I think I made, and out of all the people that talked to me, almost none of them did it. It's an undertaking. It's in the old world where things don't matter in terms of stats or anything. It's just a shiny item. And out of like the 15, 16, 18 people that said, hey, I'm questing for Sulfuron, can you make it for me when I'm done? I would always say yes. One of them ever came back for it, and it was months later. I didn't even recognize the guy. And he said, hey, I'm ready. Can you go make Sulfuron for me? And I go, yeah, it's 800 gold, or it's 700 gold plus your materials. And he tried to give me shit for it. He's like, dude, it's, you have to go through this dungeon and press one button. Are you sure that's 700 gold? I said, dude, I'm the only one. That is Mundle's thing, that I am the only one that can do this. I dare you to find anybody else in all of Moonguard that can make Sulfuron. And he's like, fine, I'll find someone else. He came back a few days later, couldn't find anybody. He's like, fine, I'll pay the 700 gold. So he gave me the materials, and I made Sulfuron for him. I don't know if he ever actually found the Eye of Ragnaros and made it into Sulfurous. I don't think he ever did, otherwise people would have been talking about it on a server like Moonguard. But I only ever made the vessel hammer one other time, and that guy was like a hunter, so it's not like he was ever going to actually use it. But whatever, it was my 700 gold to spend. So that's kind of the foundation for who this character is and where he comes from. He spent so much time in like the burning steppes where there's dragons and dark iron and all this terrible, horrible stuff. And then things kind of settled down for him for a while. And I thought, well, Mundle's kind of done what we set out to do. You ever get to that point in like an MMO or a video game or a D&D campaign where it's like, well, this character was made to do X. What? Now I have accomplished X. What do I do now? It's like saving up to buy a car, or buy a new house, or train a horse, or become, lose X amount of weight. It's like you've labored after this for so fucking long. It's like it's always been a part of your life, and you don't know what to do after that. Well, Mundle spent, 6 months tracking down all of the old world recipes, save for like 1 or 2 that were almost unobtainable. And, he made Sulfuron. He crafted Sulfurous. There in the old world, it goes no higher. It's like, well, Mundle is the best old world blacksmith in all of Moonguard. On the whole server, people come to him for blacksmithing stuff to look epic, to look pretty in their RP servers. Guilds would come to him wanting like 6, 8, 10 sets of armor, and they'd pay through the nose for it because it would look cool. And things like that, because it was stuff that you just couldn't find anymore. And I was like, well, what do I do now? So I was like, well, I've got Sulfurous. So I can hit really hard, and he's a warrior, he's a fighter, whatever it was, warrior, Tauren warrior. And back in the day, before you could start raiding, you would have to go on your, they called it the Dungeon 0 set. Before you could go like raiding and go up against the big dragons and all the fire lords and all the big bosses that would take 40 people to kill, each class back in the day had a long set of quests called the Dungeon 0 Armor Set quest.